it's Hub, and this is Video of the Damned on the Morbidly Beautiful network. I'm proud to have been part of this channel for a year now, initially coming aboard to host an interview podcast called The Chamber. I haven't booked guests in a while, but I am hoping to at least have a couple more conversations for that series before we retire that title. And I definitely want to do some more reviews for you here. So this episode, I thought we would talk about 3 of the biggest horror releases in 2024. MAXXXINE, Trap, and Longlegs. And what I'd like to do is first give spoiler-free reviews of each of those movies. And then if you haven't seen them, you can turn off this episode, go enjoy them, and then come back with everybody else who has seen those movies. And we'll do the spoiler portion of this episode where I'll go a little more in depth about the twists and the endings of each of those movies. Again, MAXXXINE, Trap, and Longlegs. And we can find out how our opinions match up or don't. Just, leave in the comments below there or find me on social media.
I am at Brody Hubbard pretty much everywhere and brodyhubbard.com. Although Video of the Damned does have an Instagram account, Video of the Damned, and it's on Twitter/X at Video Damned.
So let's start with MAXXXINE, because this is one I've definitely been looking forward to, maybe more than any other film this year, besides Terrifier 3, because yes, I'm a big stupid Art the Clown fan. But I liked X. I saw X way after probably everybody else did, but once I finally enjoyed it, I really enjoyed it. And so when Pearl came out, whole other beast going on right there, right? The Technicolor 1918 period piece. And I think a lot of folks like that one the best. I certainly heard a lot of reviews of MAXXXINE saying that this was their least favorite in the trilogy. It is actually my favorite.
Mia Goth returns to the role of MAXXXINE, who has relocated to Los Angeles several years after surviving the events of X. She is making a living in pornography and stripping, but then auditions for the lead role in a sequel to a prominent horror film, and she gets the role. And so now she is trying to navigate her new movie career with surviving on the streets because the Night Stalker is out and about. There's problems at the studio as well. She has a director who's very hard on her but expects the best. And there's protesters outside the shooting of this satanic film. Meanwhile, there's a blackmailer who pops up who seems to know what happened at that farm so many years ago. The cast includes Elizabeth Debicki, Halsey, Giancarlo Esposito, and Kevin Bacon.
Where it said that X is Ty West's Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Pearl is his version of a old Technicolor film. This is his tribute to Giallo and 80s sleaze and Brian De Palma and neon things like that. If you're like me, you'll have fun with the music, you'll have fun with the costumes, you'll have fun with the Tarantino Once Upon a Time in Hollywood-like look at the movie business, although this is in the 80s, not the 70s. The performances are strong. I mean, you got some of the best actors in the cast, right? The gore is top-notch. Some of the twists, which I'll be talking about in the spoiler section, are kind of silly. I can't say I didn't see them coming, but it's a thrill ride, and it's a tribute to cinema and 80s cinema in particular, so I'm okay with it. For now, let's move on to Trap.
I'm not supposed to tell, but I don't really watch M. Night Shyamalan movies. I do know he's an acclaimed writer-director, and this is his most recent film starring Josh Hartnett. When he was younger, he was in The Faculty and Halloween H2O, but more recently, Oppenheimer and television show The Bear, one of my favorites. I have to mention the cinematographer in this, Sayumbu Mukdiprum. He's done Suspiria, the remake, and a bunch of other Luca Guadagnino movies. I absolutely love his work, and this film, which is shot like a concert film for much of it, looks brilliant. Everybody who's seen the trailer already knows the high concept premise. Josh Hartnett plays Cooper, a serial killer who's also a dad, and taking his daughter to a concert, which turns out to be the site of a manhunt for him.
I think there's people who might have not even known who the director of this was when they saw the trailer and just thought it was a cool looking movie. I was actually one of those people. I'm not really familiar with M. Night's work. I have to say, I've seen bits and pieces of probably the same movies that everybody else has already seen. I know the memes, I know the twists, but it's just not work I've sought out. So this was the first time that I sought out one of his films. And I really ended up having a fun time. I like the fact that it's something different in the context of a concert going on, as opposed to always behind alleyways or in haunted houses. It reminded me a lot of
Nothing Underneath and Too Beautiful to Die, which are two of a series of 3 films from Italy, giallo-type kind of films that take place on the modeling runway and models in music videos. I think M. Night's daughter, Salika Shyamalan, does a great job as Lady Raven.
And yeah, I think there's a lot of people, myself included, who would have been fine if the movie stayed at the concert the whole time. But that's not where we end up going. And we'll talk more about that in the spoiler section. But I have to say that I did like beyond the concert. But yeah, the concert stuff is definitely the strongest, I mean, easily, of the film.
The family stuff is interesting too, though, and Alison Pill gives a great performance. We're going to talk all about this in the spoiler section, though. So for now, we move on.
And finally, Longlegs, which I might even have less to say about this outside of the spoiler section.
I think I'm allowed to say that Micah Monroe from It Follows is a brand new FBI agent who sees shit soon as the first day on the job. Blair Underwood is her boss, and he's a very renowned actor. I know the younger generation might not know his stuff, but he was in Crush Groove, L.A. Law, one of my personal favorites, Mario Van Peebles' Posse. Alicia Witt actually plays the FBI agent's mom, and she's not that much older than Micah Monroe, but the timeline jumps back and forth a little bit, so she's playing a younger person and an older version of herself. I love Alicia Witt. Gosh, 4 Rooms, Fun, The Sopranos, Twin Peaks, The Return. Kiernan Shipka has an important role in this. You know her from Mad Men, Sabrina, Totally Killer. And yes, Nicolas Cage is in this, but I'm showing you him from the premiere and not the movie because we're saving a lot for the spoiler section. Writer-director Osgood Perkins, also known as Oz Perkins, is an accomplished writer and director, actor as well. And I'm going to save a bit of his personal backstory for the spoiler section because while I don't usually talk about the life of the directors, in this case for this movie, it's very important.
Because you know, you want to go in, it's a lot like Barbarian. You want to go in not knowing too much. In fact, the vibe felt a little bit Barbarian to me, which is funny because that's definitely not Oz Perkins' inspiration. He has made it very clear that he doesn't watch modern horror. And dude, maybe you should. Not because you made a bad movie. I have mixed feelings about this movie, but I overall recommend it. And, you know, he came out and said, you know, like he doesn't watch the Mike Flanagan stuff. Neither do I. Never seen a Mike Flanagan movie. Just not interested in seeking out the work. I'll be honest. I'm sure somebody will eventually nudge me towards something. And we could do a whole segment on why I'm not particularly interested in Mike Flanagan's work. But I don't want to hurt his feelings. Or yours if you're a Mike Flanagan fan. My point being, Perkins made a movie that was inspired, he even says, by Silence of the Lambs and Seven, and going back further than that, The Shining. Here's the thing, man, like, there's other folks who grew up watching the same movies that you did, and they made movies too that are cool. So, like, you're not going to dislike those movies necessarily. I think you might have fun with them. But nevertheless, I would say see all of those movies, and then let's talk about spoilers for each of those movies.
And it can be nice, make me go now, I have to come back, not once, not twice. twice, but as many times as
Let's start with MAXXXINE.
Yes, the twist, or maybe it's not a twist, just a reveal, of Maxine's dad being the big evil of this film. Kind of silly. Feels a little bit Scooby-Doo-ish. It's just in the sense of the actor's portrayal and how over the top he is, and the fact that it's almost like the reveal of Scream 3. Like, okay, you're telling me that this dude is responsible not necessarily for all of the murders throughout the series. That would be chronologically impossible, and logistically impossible. But he's definitely meant to be the monster at the end of the book, right? And I didn't necessarily buy that, but because this movie has such a giallo feel, like, okay, I can buy into the logic of this 80s giallo erotic thriller tribute that, you know, that it makes sense, like as much sense as any of those movies did in the 80s. I mean, I've talked about how Phenomena has a razor-wielding chimp. Like, that's less believable probably than Maxine's dad. Maybe. But it certainly didn't ruin it for me, although the cult itself just felt very much like out of Dragnet, the Aykroyd Hanks version with Pagan, pagan. Like, yeah, that's what it felt like. And some of the costuming in this movie might have been as audacious as Hanks and Aykroyd's outfits in that film when they were undercover. But it's okay. Like, there's so much good commentary in this about religion and cinema. I mean, really, that's what the whole series, I mean, Ty West has said, is really about, like, touching on those themes in X and in Pearl. And this is the logical conclusion to that. And honestly, it's the most fun of those movies, and it's probably the only one that I would go back and rewatch. I've certainly gone back and rewatched parts of Pearl because it's just so good. And I'm sure I would like to get around back to X and just see it again now with the perspective of having seen all the films and knowing what came before it and what came after it chronologically, and seeing it in those new eyes. Like, it's a good movie. They're all good movies to me. But MAXXXINE is the most fun that I would come back to and probably watch again and again the most.
Let's talk Trap and what happens after they leave the concert.
Okay, so does Trap have the traditional M. Night twist? Not really. His wife is the one who has turned him in to the cops and set them on this trap. I don't know if that's as big a twist as, like, The Sixth Sense or any of M. Night's other movies. But really, the twist for the audience is, hey, this whole thing's not going to be at the concert. We end up following Lady Raven in the limo and at the house and back in the limo. And it was odd that she suddenly became the protagonist of the movie. And then the point of view was ripped right away from her again when she escapes. And now we're back with Cooper for the rest of the film. Except the third act really is Alison Pill as the wife. She's the protagonist now. That part and that switching around and that shifting around might have made me a little bit narratively dizzy. But it was fun. And it was a good story. And it's kind of hard not to root for Cooper because Josh Hartnett's so charming. And the fact that he does manage to escape in the end, it's a fun little ending. And I know that we're not necessarily going to revisit this character or this universe, but it's funny to think that he may be somewhere out there in a Dexter-ish kind of way, although since there's been diminishing returns with the character of Dexter, like, yeah, let's not go back to Cooper. Let's leave it as is. It's a good little story. Were all the narrative points believable? No, of course not. I mean, people were giving Cooper way too much information than they should give a stranger. He got way too much access. But I also see it as like, well, the movie is about this guy, and he's an interesting guy because he knows how to manipulate things to his favor. So we're not going to see the movie about the guy who makes it to step 6 out of 10 and then gets shut down. I mean, that wouldn't necessarily be as interesting a movie. You got to see the guy who knows how to get from point A to point Z, and how he manages to charm his way through, or how he uses his wits. Was every response believable? Was every unfolding of events believable? No. That's okay. It's a movie. Have fun with it.
Also gotta love that Shyamalan cast Haley Mills, who as a child was in The Parent Trap, in this movie as an FBI director trying to trap a parent. And she's definitely got the Donald Pleasance / Malcolm McDowell, Dr. Loomis thing down. Now let's talk about Longlegs. It turns out that Nicolas Cage's Longlegs is using dolls to possess families to kill each other, and it's the FBI agent's mom, played by Alicia Witt, who is actually his accomplice getting those dolls into the houses. It was part of a deal that he spared the daughter, and the mom had to do that deed.
Okay, Longlegs is a little bit different of a matter with me, because I don't even necessarily find the story itself the most interesting thing. Now certainly Perkins has come up with a great horror villain, and he had intended to. He said Longlegs lived in his mind for quite a while. He tried to stick him to different projects. He compared him to Pennywise from It. And he finally found this story that he wanted to do, and stuck Longlegs in there. And then a lot of Longlegs was fleshed out between him and Nicolas Cage. Other than that, he knew he wanted to tell a Silence of the Lambs type story. And, he is very sentimental for the 90s. That's when he lost his father, Anthony Perkins, Norman Bates, Psychos 1 through 4. And Perkins himself, Oz was in Psycho 2 as a young Norman Bates, interestingly enough. But this movie is less about his dad than it is about his mother, who shielded him and his brother all those years from knowing that Anthony Perkins was gay, or bisexual at least, but generally had relationships with men. He didn't know that, but everybody around him knew that. And so his mother hid this secret from him. And so Alicia Witt, being the mother with the secret in this, is very much about Osgood Perkins' mother, who, by the way, died on 9/11. She was in the first plane that hit the World Trade Center. So definitely one of those cases where truth is stranger than fiction, if you look at his life and his story. I have to tell you, though, even if I wasn't a fan of how everything was executed in this, honestly, I'm a big fan of how he likes to tell stories and what he decided to put together for this. While I disagree with his embargo on modern horror, I think he should watch Barbarian and some other films just so he can see what else is out there. But, again, y'all are inspired by the same 70s, 80s, and 90s movies. So I think you'll enjoy it, Osgood. But I enjoy his approach to storytelling and what he talked about, how much this film meant to him and what it meant to kind of exorcise some demons about his mother. And that's what Nicolas Cage is doing in this. Longlegs and his mannerisms are actually Nicolas Cage's mother's mannerisms, or they were. He grew up with a mentally ill mother. Alicia Witt, who plays the mom in this, also had very mentally ill parents who she lost tragically. It was a situation where they lived in poor conditions, never let her come over, never let her help them repair their house, and they died in the elements. They died of the cold. They froze to death. It's horrible. And so she worked out some darkness, she said, on this set and in this role. And so when you have these folks coming together to express themselves artistically and, again, exorcise the demons of their familial past. And it turns into this movie. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to it because, you know, Osgood Perkins had the horror elements that he wanted to express. He wanted to tell this kind of story. He wanted to tell a crime thriller story, but also a satanic panic kind of story. But I guess where Satan is real in this, or at least his disciple is. And he's got magic and dolls. You know, that's some Stuart Gordon shit right there. But that's the story he wanted to tell. But also just to come together and tell underneath the layers of that is a very personalized, a very personal story, really by all of them involved with each other. It's very serendipitous. So it makes me appreciate this film as a work of art. And I will see it again, knowing everything about it now that I didn't going into the film. But it was a frustrating film. There was just so many, like, you think M. Night has some odd dialogue, some stilted dialogue. Let's talk about some of the FBI agents in Longlegs. Let's talk about our protagonist, played by Malcolm Monroe. But that's a deliberate character choice. And she was great. She did a very good job with the character. There may be a lot of elements in this. I saw another review that said a lot of spaghetti thrown at the wall. Totally agree. But, you know, that's what I like. I like an odd kind of movie like The Manor or Natty Knox, or something where it's like, wow, you just threw a lot of stuff in here, a Colobos. But this, you know, has more of that prestige to it. I don't know that it's elevated horror. I've seen a lot of people call it slow burn horror. It didn't feel that slow to me, but neither did In a Violent Nature, so I might be the wrong guy to ask. Well, as I said, that's all I have for at least a little while. I do hope to return with some conversations with some guests on the chamber, and you know, we're gonna make it to October. We're gonna make it to that Terrifier 3 episode, and we're gonna make it to that year-end episode where Colleen Carney Hefner and I look back at everything that came out in 2024. If I pass out and die on New Year's Day 2025, I will at least have gotten those episodes out. So, until then, I'm Hub. This is Video of the Damned, Morbidly Beautiful Network. I'll see you on the other side.